people whose lives were changed irreparably, and their experiences cannot be reduced to a simple cold calculus. The PIRA's war on London also prompted its fair share of societal consequences. First and foremost, at the literal centre of attacks, the City of London became a heavily surveilled metropole as a result of pressure by the business community. In 1993, vehicle checkpoints were set up, CCTV cameras installed, and random spot checks instituted to create a screen against terrorism. The scheme was informally nicknamed the Ring of Steel, a security cordon that wrapped around much of the financial sector. All in all, by 1996, the 2.9-kilometre square patch of land that is the City of London played host to more than 1,000 security cameras, foreshadowing the rise of mass surveillance in wider London. The persistent threat of a PIRA attack in London also led to a general state of fearfulness, as is summarised in this 1973 interview of passers-by on the subject of letter bombings.
Are you at all worried about the possibility of letter bombs?
Well, yes, very anxious, yes. I was just thinking, coming up the stairs, that I've got letters to open and I'd like to leave it to somebody else because I'm very nervous about it.
Well, I'm just not going to take any risks. If there's any parcels, vaguely round the size I've been warned about, I won't touch them.
The PIRA's attacks negatively affected the Irish expatriate population in London too, who quickly became the subjects of abuse. Dormant prejudices of Irish backwardness, not uncommon in Britain, reared their heads in colourful epithets and in some cases physical abuse. Irish and even Northern Irish tenants in London were singled out with chants of, quote, IRA scum and IRA queer bitch. And in this case, the tenant was forced to move as a result of the harassment. Generally speaking, attitudes towards Irish people in Great Britain during the Troubles were extremely poor, to the degree where British legislation ended up singling out Irish people as potential threats to public order. The Terrorism Prevention Act of 1974 granted incredible power to policing institutions and the executive branch to detain and deport individuals on suspicion of terrorism or subversion, except in the case that they were born in Great Britain or had been resident there for at least 20 years. This effectively prejudiced proceedings against Irish expatriates and UK citizens from Northern Ireland. The Act was also problematic in the sense that it allowed police officers to arrest and interrogate people simply on suspicion of support for the IRA, sometimes without a warrant. If someone professed support for a united Ireland, that may have been enough to suspect affiliation. It was often left to the discretion of individual officers who might have had their own personal biases and convictions of what constituted suspicious activity. In the words of the political historian Paddy Hilliard, the Irish in England became a, quote, suspect community, suffering under an air of hostility and discrimination due to their perceived propensity for violence and terrorism. This video intended to explain the Troubles in a new light, using the IRA's attacks on London as a lens through which to understand it. I also wanted to engage with a part of the conflict's history that usually isn't discussed. I didn't really want it to have an explicit argument because with a topic like this it's very easy to get railroaded into vilifying one side over the other. Ultimately, the Troubles is an incredibly difficult topic to cover because the scars are still so fresh, with an official ceasefire between the PIRA and the United Kingdom only emerging in 1998 under the Good Friday Agreement. It also never truly solved the Irish question and the fate of Northern Ireland, and as such, any coverage will always be accompanied by controversy. While I was researching this topic, I came across an article by someone called Annie Bowman, the daughter of a British soldier who died in Northern Ireland defusing an IRA bomb. I think her perspective is perhaps the most useful in how we should approach the Troubles, and sectarian and nationalist conflicts in general. Despite her loss and the associated trauma, she was able to empathize with people on both sides of the conflict and see them as individuals pursuing their versions of justice. She saw how IRA militants may have been radicalized by the inability of the UK government to take their pleas seriously and the conditions that Irish Catholics were expected to endure. She understood that both sides had dehumanized one another and failed to understand the roots of animosities and grievances. The racists who shouted slurs at the Irish in London were not inherently evil, but their minds were fogged by fear and ignorance. And the IRA members that bombed the city committed terrible acts, but in their minds they were only doing what they thought was required to reach justice. To preempt such vitriol and violence, it is paramount that these communities have outlets to enter dialogues with each other, and it is just as important that these communities feel that these dialogues are actionable. Who knows, if Protestants and Catholics had not lived in mutual fear in 1969, perhaps a conclusion could have been reached at the ballot box instead of at the tip of a bayonet.